welcome to PCBCast. This is our third episode in the series this year, and very excited to be talking about Manchester. We've got lots of news coming up. Very pleased to introduce Savills and FEC, who are last to introduce themselves, and our latest addition to PCB, Sean Anderton, who is setting up our team now. More on that as we get into the episode. So I'll first of all hand over to Jamie Adam.
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here. So I head up the Northern New Homes team for Savills, based in Manchester, covering city centre, suburban Manchester, and the wider northwest. And I'm joined by Nathan Riddock, who is a senior sales consultant in our Manchester-based team.
And I think you started in 2016.
I did. Feels like a lifetime ago.
Excellent. So we'll look forward to getting into the details. And you've seen the journey of Manchester over the last few years, which has been an absolutely phenomenal story. So really looking forward to getting insights into that. And Stephen Clayton from FEC, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, Sam. Thank you very much for having us. My name's Stephen Clayton, Senior Sales Manager at FEC. Currently working on our Victoria North project in Manchester, the large regeneration that's joint venture in Manchester City Council, alongside a couple of other projects, inclusive of our Trafford project, which is a further 1,000 units that we'll be adding to the pipeline, which we can cover, I'm sure, a little bit later on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And finally, Sean, if you'd like to just give us a few words about yourself.
I'm Sean Anderton, licensed conveyancer, recently hired by PCB. I'm heading up the new Manchester office. It'll be opened up at the beginning of June. I've been in conveyancing for about 10 years now. Don't want to admit to that. I feel old. Post-qualified for about 8 of those almost. And since 2017, I've been quite heavily involved in the off-plan development sector and dealing with overseas investors. Excited to be here and excited to help PCB grow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, all of you. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to be covering today, we'll obviously be looking at the Manchester property market as an overview and getting a feel for, as I mentioned, the history that Savills have had really a front row seat at, and also very importantly, where we see things as currently being and headed in the future. Obviously, no PCB cast will be complete without the legal considerations and then finally looking to future trends, and we'll all have a go at trying to predict what we think is going to happen and hopefully not make too big fools of ourselves in doing that. So let's kick things off with Jamie and Nathan then. Savills, extremely reputable firm with a lot of market knowledge, not just in Manchester, but nationwide and globally, in fact. So really interested to hear your insights and how you see things, how they've been in Manchester, your journey, and also what is the current state of play.
Yes, thanks, Sam. It's been a roller coaster ride since 2016. We've, as you said at the beginning, had a sort of front seat on the scale of development the Manchester scene, which really puts it in a class of its own outside of London. There really hasn't been the ambition or scale of not only residential but commercial hotel development that we've seen in the city centre, really anywhere else in the UK. And it's been an exciting time to be involved in the residential sector in the city. The skyline, for anyone who's visited Manchester, who's known the city for some time, every time you come in on the train, it's incredible just to see the transformation that's taking place right in front of all of us. You think back to pre-Deansgate Square, and the only major tall residential building was Beetham Tower. And it was, solitary there for a decade or so. But now you come and there are multiple towers across the city with many more planned. And I think for us, it's been fantastic to see the growth of the city, the population increase, the take-up of commercial space, albeit obviously slightly down during COVID. But the way that the city's rebounded post the pandemic has been nothing short of astonishing, really. And I think whether you're an investor looking at the rental sector, whether you're an owner-occupant, the scale of what's being delivered, the quality of what's being delivered into the residential sector, the choice that you now have, be it different developers, be it different schemes that are available. The amenity provision that's coming forward in most of the developments now is second really only to London. There's no other regional city delivering the quality and amenity provision that these developments do. And it's very clear why both owner-occupiers and investors are attracted to Manchester as an area to buy. A huge student population, growing all the time, lots of international students, fantastic job opportunities that the city offers, which again multiplying all the time, the quality of the jobs, the pay rates of those jobs going up all the time. So for us, it's been a really exciting journey. The future looks very bright for Manchester, and certainly where we are today, Manchester and the north of England more generally is probably the single biggest hotspot in property in the residential property sector in the UK at the moment.
Definitely, we're certainly seeing that, and I wouldn't want to get too carried away, but I think possibly worldwide, the economies around the world are very subdued, I think is a fair way to put it. And there are only really a couple of hotspots which are really bucking that trend, Dubai being an obvious one, and Manchester being another. I'm sure there are others as well that are less on PCB's radar, but can certainly speak to Manchester being really bucking the trend and being a hotspot, as you say. Let's rewind a bit more. 10 years ago, Manchester was trying to break the scene and become an investment destination, which it's fairly obvious now it's achieved. But at the time, it was all about London, and that was really where investors would look, and buyers generally, when looking to buy property in the UK. What was it when you decided pre-2016 to focus on Manchester? What were those things that you saw the potential in, and why was it that you had that foresight to set up there and give it your focus and attention?
I think what Manchester offered was rare from the position that you had a city council, as we still do, who are hugely supportive of development, be it residential, commercial, etc. And when you look across the UK and you look at a lot of planning authorities, local authorities, there isn't the desire, there isn't the drive, there isn't vision to really put a town or a city like Manchester on the map in the way that the city council have. And obviously expertly guided by, sadly the now late Sir Howard Bernstein. And we could see as a business from 2014-15 onwards that the trajectory of the city and the ambition of the development that was coming forward and the desire to really transform the city was there. And I think Manchester had, pre-global financial crisis, had actually seen a significant amount of investment. There was a lot of activity in the market here, albeit that was much more UK-based Irish investors as well, but not so many from further afield, certainly not from the Far East or Middle East. And I think we could see that there was the opportunity. 2000, there were developments that were starting to go out, and there'd been some decent results. And that was primarily the desire for us, UK second city. We wanted to be part of that journey. We obviously have a very large office here in Manchester, which is multidiscipline from development through to hotel, commercial agency. And so it was a sort of natural addition for the brand to bring in a new home sales business into the city centre, given the majority of what was coming forward was high quality new build development. So that was really why we chose Manchester. We followed that up with Birmingham a couple of years later, but certainly Manchester has performed extremely well for us as a business.
Just to go back to one of the earlier things you said, and to draw another parallel with Dubai, is that support of government and that eagerness from government to really promote the city and to really bring it to the 21st century with an economic strength and that kind of forward thinking planning is really, I think, a strength that the two cities have in common, and that's probably why they're two places that are bucking the more subdued economic backdrop that most other places are experiencing. It's probably a good segue to ask Stephen a bit about the local council and the planning and his developments that he's been involved with and that are coming up in the future. How do you find Manchester from that perspective, Stephen, and tell us a bit about your journey since starting here?
Yeah, it's been one of growth. If you look at the city, going back to something that Jamie said in terms of the changing skyline. Personally, I've been a resident of the city for coming on 15 years now, and through that period, even pre-life at FEC, I was working for a local resi agent in Manchester, and the growth that we saw and the change in quality and that drive and the real passion for what we're delivering in Manchester is something that is at the forefront, I think, of everything we do. I think you look generally across the city and compare it to other regional cities, the difference in quality is really quite astonishing. And particularly when I look at what we're doing at Victoria North and some of the elements that we're throwing in there, and it's all new stuff that's never been done before in the city, and the support and guidance that we get from the city council as our joint venture partner is obviously we wouldn't be able to do what we do without them. The creation of the City River Park, it's a 113-acre park. It's the largest that the city centre will have, and that is going to be beneficial not only to the residents of Victoria North, but from people that are coming from further afield that are visiting the city. If you compare it, and we've drawn parallel to London quite a fair bit in the conversation so far, but you look at Hyde Park, the Regent's Park, where they've got that offering, that inner city offering, along with all the different pocket parks they've got. There's a real consideration for us in terms of that lifestyle and the journey. It's not just about the single tower that you're living in, it's being part of something that's bigger than that. And that is what we have the ability to deliver at Victoria North. It's something at scale, something that Manchester's never been able to offer before in terms of the sheer size of it. It's nearly 400 acres in size. So it's the largest residential redevelopment project that's currently underway in the UK, which is quite some statement and a little bit of a mouthful as well. But to be able to offer something like that to Manchester, which is a city that, speaking selfishly and personally, is really important to me. It's a privilege to be able to work on something like that.
Just going back to my earlier point about looking back 10 years, and we could talk about the reputation of the developers from anywhere and from Manchester in particular, and also the quality of the development happening there. It was a much harder sell to have investors interested in I hate the expression, but second tier city. And I find it staggering how much that has changed. The quality of the developers, the quality of the development. As lawyers, we wouldn't get involved in advising clients on those aspects. PCB are in a very privileged position where we do work with the best developers, and we are in a position where we can be quite selective with who we work with and the developments that we represent buyers on. So we do tend to lean towards the better quality developers anyway. But in terms of, again, not to wish to keep drawing comparisons to London, but if you look at London 10 years ago versus Manchester 10 years ago, and you look at it today, and in many ways, Manchester has actually probably pulled ahead. I don't know what the stat would be, Stephen, as to whether that 400-acre site is not just UK, but maybe Europe. I don't know. That sounds like a huge development for residential to me, and something that you'd be amazed to see in London, let alone Manchester.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the big things when we're looking on an international scale, people are, I wouldn't say sick to death because they're such great developments, but ultimately it's been done time and time again with the likes of your Batterseas, your Brent Crosses. And when you draw a parallel to Brent Cross and you say that was 7,000 units, in terms of quantum of units, we're more than double the size of that, which is quite astonishing. And I think the complete variety of what's going to be held within the master plan as well. You've got everything from Collyhurst, which is it's your 3-story townhouses, it's your first time buyer properties that offer parking and that fringe city living that we don't really get in Manchester. There's 3,000 houses that we've got the potential for there, which again is something that we can't offer in the city at the moment. Obviously, there's smaller developments, but by sheer demand, that is possible. We've had the first phase of that in the market, probably coming on to about 12 months now, and it's been incredibly popular. And it's all people that are migrating from your inner city apartments that don't particularly want to move out to the suburbs, that still want to be able to commute within 10 minutes into the city centre, that are taking these up. But then again, you go on the flip side, you come into the Red Bank Riverside neighbourhoods, what you would class as your typical city centre living, apartments, the level of amenity, again, the complete range of housing and offerings that we can have within that. And when I say they're one extreme to another, within the master plan, we will have everything in between as well. For us, it's very community focused. It's a lot of green living. And you touched upon Europe there. So the architect that we're working in to develop the landscape in the public realm is actually based in Copenhagen. So there's a lot of influence coming from other European cities that we're looking at taking the best bits, because we've got a real opportunity to create something groundbreaking that's never been seen before, not only in Manchester, but I'd like to think anywhere in the regions.
Excellent. I still get excited when a developer launches a 100-unit development. So when we're talking 200 or 300, I get really excited, and now it's in the thousands. So it really is staggering, as I say. And 7,000 units in Brent Cross, which is an excellent scheme. You're right, that's a huge number. I think the water is that 3,000 or 4,000. I think Savills are involved with that one, and yeah, big numbers of units, and then you're 2 or 3 times the size of that. So it really is eye-popping to see what's happening there. And I think it's a kind of really symbolic of the scale of what's happening in Manchester. Sean, I've obviously done my best to indoctrinate you into the cult of PCB over the last few weeks, but as a relatively unbiased opinion, and having worked in the region for all of your career, tell us a bit about how you see things are having unfolded.
Definitely, and it's been really interesting to get Jamie's and Stephen's take on it as well. I think I probably first started getting involved in the Manchester off plan scene about 8 years ago, so 2016, 2017, when it really started kicking off. And when I first started, we were getting reservations for Manchester, we were getting cases for Manchester, but there was a lot of other, especially like you've already touched on, London featured quite heavily in the early years. But then as the years have gone on, the general shift in volume is very much swung in Manchester's favour. From the outside looking in, sort of as the conveyancer, just seeing the trend in changing instructions, I think it's clear to see that Manchester as a city and a site for development has eclipsed its initial expectations. I think people did think it would become a hotspot for development, it would appreciate in value, and it would attract developers. But I think the speed with which it's done that, and the resilience with which it's done that in terms of other economies such as like London and Birmingham and other investment hotspots, I think it very much shows. And it's exciting to hear, from what Stephen was saying, that there's still a lot of reason to get excited for what is still to come for Manchester in terms of developments and potential instructions for us, both in the near future and the far future. And I think a big part about the driving force for Manchester's resilience and its growth has been these kind of residential developments. The knock-on effect that these residential developments have, and these developers and these agents that are investing their time and effort into Manchester are turned into instructions for us. I think without that, the knock-on effect that would have on Manchester as a whole would be felt, because it's these developments that attract the investors and the investment, and then that has a knock-on effect on the rental market. It has a knock-on effect on the residential resale market. So I think these developments that we're acting on, we're representing investors on, I think they're the driving force for Manchester's growth as a whole, as a city.
I think, Sean, if I can just jump in there, frame that from the perspective of some figures to back up what we've. If you take the Deloitte Crane survey, which is the sort of bible of what's been going on in the city amongst other regional cities, 22,000 new residential units across 178 projects delivered since 2018, 3.5 million square foot of office space, and 4,000 new hotel rooms. I mean, that scale is enormous. When you then think that the council's target for new construction of residential properties in and around the city is 36,000 more units by 2032, you're looking at the best part of 60,000 new residential property being constructed between 2018 and 2032. It's a massive increase. And it always reminds me of my sort of favourite stat, whether I'm talking to a buyer here in the UK or an investor overseas, that if you go back to the early 80s, the number of people who were registered to pay council tax in Manchester city centre was under 1,000 residents, literally under 1,000. And today, there are over 80,000 residents in the city centre on a permanent basis, and that figure is growing year on year on year. And of course, all of those buyers, all of those tenants need properties to live in, and growth, that demand for high quality residential property in the city centre is what's driving the development sector so much.
I think what you've both really hit on there, Sean, you said speed and eclipsing expectations. People, when they look at property cycles, market cycles, they are trying to predict where's the boom, where's the peak, and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people would have looked at Manchester over the last decade and thought that actually this is having its day in the sun. I put my hands up. That was an assessment I'd made a few years ago completely incorrectly. And it's that snowball effect that Sean mentioned of it all feeding into each other. So the council promoting things and the commercial space development, which then creates demand for the resi and vice versa. And if anything, my assessment now is that Manchester is very much snowballing. And although we've seen a almost meteoric rise of the city in the last certainly 5 years and slightly longer, it does feel like it's just getting going. The quality of the developers, the quality of the developments, the plans for the city, and really the scale of the ambition. Let's hear from Nathan. Nathan, you are my go-to for man on the ground info on Manchester. So what do you think about what we've discussed and the speed with which the city has been developing and just rising, as I say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is really interesting. I was a student in Manchester. I've always lived very local to the city, and the change has been drastic. There's no denying that. But I also think the important thing to focus on is the city used to be so reliant in terms of from an investment perspective on the student population. And I think that's probably completely changed now. It is still a really important factor, but I also think that forward-thinking vision from the council has really helped that retention of those really good students. And I also think that's also pushed the wider economy because we've seen more corporates open up, JP Morgan, some of the bigger enterprises, Booking.com, etc. So I think that's a really big factor in this now, and that'll push the growth even further. In terms of the development itself, I remember the student halls I was living in for one factor, and if you look at what's coming out in that sector of the market now, it's unrecognisable. It's state of the art, the amenity provision, everything else, and that's led into the residential sector as well. To be honest with you, Sam, it's a really exciting time to be part of the city, and from where I am day to day, speaking to all our clients, I think they're excited by it as well. And I don't see any kind of downplaying that. I think there's a lot more to come out of Manchester. What FEC are doing at that corner of the city, it's transforming that corner of the city in particular, but there's a wide range of regeneration going on. So yeah, I think watch this space is what I'd say.
And I think one thing just to touch upon and elaborate on there as well, Nathan, is when we're talking about regeneration and a lot of stuff when I'm speaking to investors, be it overseas, be it domestic, be it owner occupiers, the word regeneration, automatically people lean to it's miles out of the city. It's so far away. But realistically, what we've got is Manchester is such a condensed city at the moment. It's got all the best things that other big worldwide cities can offer, but on such a condensed scale. So that gives some really good opportunity. And that's not just isolated to what we're doing at Victoria North. You look at what the guys from Manchester City have done East Manchester, and you look at the south of the city equally. These are places that are the peripheries of the city, but we've got a real opportunity to regenerate stuff and bring it into what will be the future city centre. So it really is a great time to invest in stuff that will in future be swallowed up into what will be the city centre.
So it's growing, not just in terms of reputation and quality, also literally it's getting wider, isn't it?
Sheer size, yeah.
And not just up, but out as well. Yeah, huge potential. We've already started on it really, but in terms of Manchester as an investment destination, and obviously we'll talk about international investment, but we don't need to limit just to that. It's the local market and the local, both owner occupiers and investors are obviously absolutely crucial to the development of any city, and I think in Manchester particularly. So why don't we start with, you talked about students, Nathan, and we've all touched upon rents a little bit. That's been quite a story, hasn't it? The rental values there, and what is again a really good snapshot of what's been happening growth-wise in Manchester. Do you want to, Jamie or Nathan, tell us a bit about what's going on there?
Yeah, we've used the phrase already, the meteoric rise of rents in Manchester. Funny enough, I was looking at something earlier. Of the top 10 rental growth areas in the UK, 6 of them are in Greater Manchester. 6 of the 10 are in Greater Manchester. Manchester itself, the city centre, the rents have grown 33.3% since December 2020. Tameside, 40.5% rental growth in the same period. Salford, 37.1%. So some quite astonishing figures. I think obviously that needs to be looked at in the context of the wider UK. I think the national average over the same period is about 22.2%. So the North has seen higher rental growth, but clearly it's come off a lower base than a lot of the areas in South East of London are at already. There are issues in the longer term about, is that level of rent affordable? I think the challenge we've had has been that there has been a diminishing number of units delivered, new build units delivered into the market. So last year, I think that figure was in the 2,000s, whereas in the previous years, it had been up in the 5,000 or 6,000. So there's been a bit of drop off, and that's just the nature of the market we're in. Developments start, they take 2 to 3 years to build. Not everybody starts at the same time. Not everybody is going to finish at the same time. But you do have these peaks and troughs in terms of delivery. But the rental growth is driven by, as Nathan alluded to, it is far from just students. I think it's really important that we make that very clear. It is, yes, they are, as Nathan said, a very important part of the makeup of the rental market. But certainly what I've seen since 16 onwards is the growth in professional renters, people who are working in the city centre, who want to live close to their work, want to be able to walk there, they want to use the facilities and the amenities that the city offers without having to necessarily get on a tram or get on a bus or get on a train and commute out. And that's borne out by the fact that Manchester is the youngest city in the UK in terms of its demographic population. We have more under 30s living in the city than any other place in the UK. And of course, a lot of those people, young professionals, post-grads, they do want to be close to where they work, where they're learning. And so it absolutely demonstrates why the city centre has become so popular. And I think post-COVID, again, clearly, like everywhere else in the UK and a lot of other global locations, there was a sort of mass exodus from city centres, and everyone was going to go and live out in the countryside and in villages and regional towns. And frankly, Manchester returned back to normality much quicker than most other places did in the UK. Year on year to April, rental growth is 8.1%. Which most cities would be happy with on an annualised basis for 3 years. So I think that sector continues to outperform many other locations around the UK. So we see the prospects of the rental market continuing to be strong, given the population growth we're expecting to see.
I wonder, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, so don't worry if you don't have the data at your fingertip. You talk about students and it transforming into more of a sort of young professional city. How much of that is retention from students and students wanting to stay on and work in the city? I went to university in Sheffield, and that was a very much a student population. There's two big universities there, and it was just dominated by students, so much so that in the summer holidays it was a bit of a ghost town, and that had a very high retention rate, but probably not for the long term. Whereas it sounds like if Manchester had a student population that's now turning into a young professional population, is that a lot of retention from the universities there? Which perhaps you can talk about the universities as well, because that's definitely a boast of the city.
Huge amount of retention. So the figures regularly point to there being circa 50% graduate retention within Manchester across the universities. And so obviously that's Greater Manchester. There are 120,000, give or take, students in higher education in any calendar year in the city. That's an increase of nearly 20,000 in the last 5 years. So the base of students continues to grow, the attractiveness of the universities that we've got, courses that they're offering. The fact that Manchester University is at the forefront of some really cutting-edge research development that's happening, and the other universities obviously also offering really high-quality education. That is attracting both domestic students who are coming in from around the UK, but also an ever-increasing number of international students who are attracted to come to Manchester for the education that it offers.
I'm going to run a scenario now. So, Nathan, I'm an investor from the Middle East, and I've been told that Manchester is amazing. I listened to the recent PCBcast, which really convinced me I should be paying attention to it. And I'm just wondering, it seems like maybe I've missed the boat a little bit. Why should I buy in Manchester? And then perhaps I can ask the developer the same question afterwards.
Yeah, I think there's a few fundamentals as to why you invest in the city now. I think a few people probably do think that they've missed the boat, but I actually think your timing is probably spot on now. The quality of development that's coming through versus what's come through in the past kind of 10 years way ahead of where it was. The rental piece is really important, I think, in terms of your tenant profile. You've got a large tenant pool from all different demographics. So we're not seeing many rental boys on the higher quality development, new development that's coming through in particular. It's a growing city, right? We've got a massive amount of industry here, media, for example, tech. And as Stephen alluded to as well, everything's expanding outwards. I think people have got a really good opportunity now to secure a good place in the centre of the city in these prominent locations, especially in terms of the Victoria North regeneration. As we see that expand outwards, I think there's so much potential in where it can go for an investor at the moment. Like James said, the stable year-on-year rental growth, it gives that security, whereas some other places in the UK don't at the minute. I know we keep alluding back to London, but I know it's challenging now at the minute, whereas Manchester gives you a bit of safety.
I think the other thing to say on that is it's not all about rental growth. For a lot of people who we sell to in the city, they are owner-occupiers. Their primary focus is on buying somewhere that they want to live. But like most people, they have an eye to, okay, so what's the capital growth prospect for the city look? You know, if I want to sell my apartment or townhouse or whatever it may be in 4 or 5 years' time, what does that look like? And I think we as the house, as Savills, produce regular market forecasts for residential across the whole of the UK. The most recent update of that came out a month or so ago, and it points to the Northwest being the best performing region of the UK over the next 5 years, and it suggests growth of around 28 points, which is double that of London, the southeast. And why is that? Let's not forget that we are coming off a lower base. The price point in Manchester, in the Northwest, or in Yorkshire for that matter, is substantially below the southeast of England and London. And so there's more growth opportunity in those historically lower value areas. And that's why for any kind of buyer, whether they're an investor, whether they're an owner occupier, there is opportunity abounding in Manchester for rental growth, rental yield, but also, most importantly, capital growth as well.
Excellent. I'm convinced. Being from the Middle East, I wouldn't put any kind of ink on a reservation form without speaking to the developer directly and hearing what he has to say about it. Stephen.
Guess that's my cue. I think, yeah, you guys summarised it perfectly. I think, Nathan, your point in it being the period of growth that we've seen, I think we're at a real happy medium now where you're dropping into a city that's already developed, it's already thriving, you're achieving premium rents at this point already. But then there is this huge period of growth that's still to go, and it's set. It's not just plucking an idea out of thin air and going, yeah, I think that there could be some growth. You've got real live projects where you've got spades in the ground, where there are significant areas of growth. You know, if I look at, and going back to the Victoria North side, you know, we look at that, we're 600, 1,000 units into 15,000 units. You know, that stat alone, and that's taking out all the other development that's due to come in the city from the other developers, who equally have got, you know, some significant pipelines. You look at the F&B scene, you look at some of the brands that are coming into Manchester. We've had our first branded residents just recently over the last 12 months. You've got brands like Soho House, you've got brands like Sexy Fish that historically have performed in a typically London-based scenario or international based. They're choosing Manchester. And there's a reason that sits behind that. Again, you've got businesses that are coming into it that historically you would never dream of them having a Manchester base. So I think you look at all of that and you take a snapshot of Manchester now and then think what could happen in the next 15 years of growth. I think there's a massive story that sits behind it for Manchester.
So it's London, Manchester, and Miami, isn't it? Sexy fish.
Yeah, I think a wise man told me that, didn't they, Jamie?
They did. And soon to be Dubai as well, we mustn't forget that. Yeah, we're punching well above our weight internationally when you think about those sorts of locations.
Excellent. And so Manchester, I'm sold. Why should I buy from FEC?
Again, it's a story of growth. You look at the master plan and the opportunity to buy into something at this stage of a master plan, it doesn't come around very often. Like I say, it's the biggest regeneration project that Manchester has ever seen. It is an opportunity that only comes around once in a generation, perhaps less than that. And to consider now that we're just about to complete on Victoria Riverside, which is the first 634 homes coming up for completion in 2025. We're just embarking on the sales of Red Bank Riverside with a successful launch of Falcon earlier in the year and another launch soon to follow. I think you look at that and you look at the quantum of units. Red Bank Riverside, I think all of us sat around today have seen that hero CGI where you've got Victoria Riverside all the way through at Red Bank Riverside. When you consider that in terms of a quantum of units is only 20% of the entire master plan. When you can start to visually see that and understand it, we recently had a model made in the marketing suite which encompasses the whole master plan. And it's all well and good sitting here and spurting facts that it's going to be home to 40,000 people. We're going to have 15,000 homes. It's across 400 acres. I think until you sit in that marketing suite, look at the model, you walk in the streets that are currently underused and underdeveloped of Victoria North. That's only when it really hits us to the scale, and it's equally the amount of work that we've got to do. But there still is a huge opportunity, and opportunity, I think, is, if there is one key takeaway from investing within Victoria North, whether that be to make it your home or as a sole investment, I think the word opportunity is the real takeaway.
One thread that was running through what you were just saying there, Stephen, and Jamie and Nathan as well, is that we talked about how do I know I've not missed the boat, and trying to look to the future, which is obviously the absolute key skill that you need to master to be an investor. This isn't speculation, it's happening, and it'll be happening for years to come, because there are some really big players, some real massive market forces, FEC being one of them, Salboy, Reneco, all of these very reputable developers with huge financial backing, who are going to be here for years finishing their projects. So it's not the case of, I think Manchester's going to be really great in a few years' time, because if this happens, there's a lot of the if has been taken away, if you like, hasn't it? Obviously none of us can see the future, and things can always change, but there is momentum that's already happening that must continue in one vein or another for a certain amount of time. Jamie, did you want to come in?
Sam, yeah, I think just to add on that, it's important to remember that a lot of what's coming forward is not just coming forward into the private sector as in for sale, it's also coming through in the build to rent sector. So not only have you got the three big developers in the city bringing forward lots of units for open market sale to homeowners, to owner occupiers, some of which are coming forward as shared ownership, but you've also then got institutionally owned buildings which are delivering hundreds and thousands of units most years into that institutionally owned sector. So it's not like the weight of the market is entirely dependent on individual purchasers. A lot of the developments happening is going to happen anyway, and it's going to be delivered into that private rented sector. So you will continue to see the skyline transform, albeit some of those schemes won't be actually for sale.
Yeah, no, that's right, Jamie. And thank you. You pulled me out of a very narrow residential new build focus there, which I lived through almost. So no, thank you for that. And let's expand even further then, and not just resi accommodation, but you mentioned at the very beginning of the call commercial space, hotels. Tell us a bit about what's going on there, because obviously this is all extremely relevant to how the city is going to be developing into the future.
Yeah, I mean, you've only got to walk around the city or go on booking.com to realise just how many new hotels have opened. I spent a reasonable amount of time staying in hotels in the city, and I can't pretend that I've tried all of them. I have tried most of them, and you really have got some fantastic new accommodation coming in. Obviously, as as we alluded to with the branded residences piece, it's a W five-star hotel that will be opening in the city in the coming years. To have hotels of that international quality coming into Manchester is a real positive for the city. It's a positive for the hospitality sector generally, and just reinforces the point we were making about some of the brands that have chosen to come and open here, be it from London or elsewhere, and those brands that we all know are still due to come to the city and are opening. Hotels, obviously, a really important sector. Work very important for a lot of the sort of convention stuff happens at Manchester Central. You've got to have those hotel rooms, but equally, a lot of the time those are being used by business people, and we've all seen some of the very large scale commercial development that's taken place. Really starting with that Spinningfields development, which is now so well embedded into the city centre, but now expanding out with the new Booking.com offices that Allied London have delivered. You've got Circle Square, a huge commercial campus just south of the city centre, and also Landsec looking to bring forward an Mayfield commercial site next to Piccadilly Station. So there's and Noma, where there's new offices coming all the time. So there's really strong demand, particularly in the new build grade A office space, and new rents being achieved, new premium rents being achieved all the time. The St Michael's commercial scheme, which is due, I think, to complete early next year, achieving rents well into £40 a square foot for the first time in Manchester, just re-emphasising that there are businesses who really want to be in the heart of the city and are willing to pay significant premiums over what one might have expected 3 or 4 years ago, and some big names coming as well, which again is really exciting for the city.
Let's talk about St Michael's then, and I think it's a useful point at which to talk about price, really, because that was really a landmark moment, wasn't it, for Manchester in terms of whatever you think of the scheme generally, looking at just the raw numbers. Just tell us a bit about what happened there.
Yeah, I've been working with our clients Relentless, who we've been advising for the best part of sort of 6, 7, 8 years on that project, and more recently with Salboy, who come in to deliver the project. Certainly the sort of phase 2, which is the hotel and residential element. It's an exceptionally exciting project which has been in the works for over a decade. I think Gary Neville's been personally working on it for coming on 15 years now, alongside the City Council, who had originally identified that section of the city centre for running between Albert Square and Deansgate as the ideal place to bring forward, A, 5-star hotel, B, some office, and potentially residential, and really to re-energise that link between the town hall and Spinningfields and Deansgate. So the project's evolved significantly over the period that we've been advising on it, but commercially has been on site for well over sort of 12, 18 months now. Building's really starting to come together, looking fantastic. You've got some very important tenants who have done pre-lets on the building, so that's coming forward. You've got Chotomoto, I can never pronounce it properly, but Chotomoto taking 16,000 square foot on the roof of the building. It would be one of their largest single restaurants globally, Chinese Peruvian food, which has come from London, and got various global locations. And then, for me, obviously, the particular interest in the scheme has been the branded residences element. And branded residences are a very particular subsector of the residential market. And as a business, we spend a lot of time advising on branded residences globally through our team based out of our head office in London. And so it was a great opportunity for us to get quite involved in the brand residences piece on St Michael's, and obviously long before the occupier, the hotel operator and the brand residences operator was announced. I have learnt a huge amount about how residential hotels all interact with one another and how many lift shafts you need and so on and so forth. But in terms of that project coming forward, it was launched last November globally by a number of agents, including ourselves, and out in the press very recently. Has achieved 98% sales in the space of effectively 6 months, which is a record for the city in terms of a virtual sellout. I think what's been really interesting has been the high proportion of UK buyers who've bought in the scheme, a lot of whom are local. They live in and around the Northwest, in and around GM, and who want the best thing in the city.
Including Gary himself, of course.
Including Gary himself. And I think it's fair to say that both they and other buyers domestically and internationally have been willing to pay a very significant premium for not only the fact that this is arguably the most central, the most impactful development that we have seen certainly in this cycle, but moreover the fact that this is a branded residence. It is a W five-star hotel with W branded residence sitting directly above it and serviced by that hotel. And the pricing that has been achieved has been record breaking at every single step of the process, right way from the smallest units, right way up to the biggest units in the development, and has set a significant new benchmark for the city.
So that's a really good opportunity for me to maybe ask Nathan, and what does this mean for the rest of the city? It's quite clear from everything that Jamie's explained why St Michael's was priced the way it was, and the premium nature, the W branded residence and that kind of thing. But it is a watershed moment for Manchester generally. And perhaps we'll ask Nathan and then Stephen for his views on how he sees things panning out from there. What does it mean for prices across the whole marketplace and not just specifically that development?
I think it sets an expectation in a way. And obviously, it's a very unique scheme in terms of where it's positioned in the city, the branded residence element. So there's a lot of variables in that respect. But I do think it sets a new benchmark. We're not saying that every new development in the city is going to be at that pricing, but it does show the demand that there are buyers in the Northwest in particular that will pay these prices. Whereas a lot of people probably thought on the outset that the pricing was incredibly high, whereas it shows the confidence that people have in the market, in particular people that are owner-occupiers. So I think it does set a new expectation, but let's see where it goes. We're already seeing on some of the new launches, incorporation of that higher level of amenities coming through. So yeah, watch this space again, I think, is my approach to it.
Stephen?
League of its own, it's a very different product to anything else. I don't think we can sit here and draw a comparison to what anything else or anybody else is doing in the city. Obviously, some of the values achieved in there were eye-watering, but for very good reason. It's going to be an astonishing scheme, and it is groundbreaking both in terms of the offering, the branded residence, and you can't take anything away from it. Me and Jamie sat and spoke about it many times, and no, I really wasn't surprised that they did so well with the sales. The market was there for it. Manchester was ready for the product. But I think we can't get too carried away. I think we have to be realistic in terms of what we're offering into the marketplace. And I think one thing that has always been our mantra is making sure that we sit there and we provide great value for money, great opportunity, but we are delivering exceptional quality within that. If you look at what we're doing at Red Bank Riverside with the clubhouse that we're setting there, first of its kind in Manchester, it's pioneering within the market here, and it's a 23,000 square foot 6-story standalone building that will be the amenity offering. You've got rooftop bar and restaurant, to name just one thing that's in there. But still, we're at a value that is significantly different to what's been achieved at St Michael's. And for me, yeah, I think that building is astonishing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it come to fruition. But like I say, complete league of its own when you compare it to your other, I won't say run of the mill, but your other, what you used to expect seeing being delivered in Manchester.
I think the thing that it's demonstrated for all of us who are involved in the industry here is just how diverse and how big that buying market now is for Manchester, domestically, internationally, homeowner, investor. The fact that you have such a wide offering in the city now from a new build perspective, that there are people who are buying at £300, £400 square foot, right the way up to close to 4 figures a square foot, just demonstrates the breadth of demand that we can see in the market. And I don't think that there are very many other places, certainly regionally, that you will be able to achieve that.
Definitely, and I we'll get into the diversity of the city, I think, when we're wrapping up. Just to complete my customer journey. So, mad about Manchester. I like the sound of St Michael's. It seems like it's sold out, possibly a bit punchy for me anyway. And FVC sounds like incredible value with the sort of park type living right on the edge of the city, possibly developing the city as well. So I'm ready to reserve, put my reservation fee down. What happens next? I've heard about the legal process.
Who's a decent lawyer at that point, Sam?
Would that be Sean by any chance?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no
Top of the
better
list.
man for the job.
Absolutely.
So what happens
Yeah.
next, Sean?
So-
I've heard mixed stories about conveyancing experience in the UK. Tell me.
So you've had the punchy taglines, you've listened to the sales pitches and the exciting stats and the figures from the developer and the agent. They've convinced you to sign on the dotted line and put your money where your mouth is. And then you come to the unavoidable truth, that dark cloud that is the perceived conveyancing process. And it is the unavoidable truth to the whole journey, really. It sits behind everything. Without the conveyancing process, your investment won't come to fruition. I think, generally speaking, and not because of the present company, the caliber of the developers in Manchester, particularly, and knowing that those developers have just as much skin in the game as you as an investor would have as well, it is reassuring to us as lawyers acting for the buyers and advising them as part of the conveyancing process. I think the main part of the process, or the linchpin of the whole thing, that's always met with the proverbial eye roll, or that necessary evil, is the AML procedure and the anti-money laundering side of things. It doesn't need to be perceived that way. And a big part of that is obviously choosing the right conveyancer for you, because when the conveyancing side of things don't go to plan, nobody benefits. The developer doesn't benefit, the agent doesn't benefit, we as the lawyers don't benefit, and neither does the investor. So I think a big part of it is to understand that although the AML requirements and the benchmarks for AML, which is our investors' main concerns, what we need is the same across the board. It's people's approach to AML that changes, that can really impact the customer journey. It's the client's approach to it and the way they perceive it, which can differ between cultures, domestic buyers compared with Middle Eastern buyers or Hong Kong buyers, for example. The way they perceive the questions you're asking them and what you're asking of them, that can be different. And the way the law firm actually approaches how they obtain that information, I think that can really impact a customer's journey. A big thing, especially with Manchester and the developers that we're working with, is that the conveyancing process doesn't need to be adversarial, and there's a lot of, we're finding now more than ever, there's a lot of collaboration between us, developers, agents, getting a head start on this AML process and making sure that the transition is smooth. Because, like you touched on before, it's the developer and the agent, they're the first people the client talks to, they're the people they have a rapport with, they're the people that they've already might have spent weeks talking about the investment, making decisions with them. And we're coming across agents now who are quite happy to lend themselves to the information gathering process as well. Some of them are already getting a jump start on giving the clients a heads up on what's needed and things like that, so that when they come to us, they've already got an idea of what we're going to be asking. It doesn't come as a shock, explaining the process to them. And I also think, specifically to PCB, is embracing technology and just really trying to simplify the way that we gather all this information so that the client can get to exchange contracts and start getting excited about their investment happens as quickly as possible. And I think that's what we've done, sort of implementing these electronic ID checks and the way we gather the information from the client. And again, just explaining to them that we don't assume they're a criminal just because we're asking for their bank statements. We don't want to know what they spend on a weekend. That's not the information that we're asking for. It's not why we need it. So once that's all explained and the buyer's on board with that, the rest of the process goes as quickly as they want it to. I had just to give a case example, the other week I had a reservation and 4 working days later we'd exchange. That's when the client's engaged and the agent and the developers are engaged, and we just simplify and explain the process and utilize the technology that we've got. That's how quickly these can go through. Like from the point of issuing in his client care documents to getting his deposit and exchanging contracts is just 4 working days. So it doesn't have to be complicated. Conveyancing doesn't have to be the necessary evil. It can be quick. It can be simple. I wouldn't go so far as to say it can be enjoyable or exciting. We are talking about conveyancing, but
you love it, don't you? You find it enjoyable and exciting.
Oh, absolutely. Conveyancing for me is a wild Friday night. Give me a report to do, I'll stay in on a Saturday. But not everyone else shares my fervour in that regard. But even for those that don't like it, or those that do have that proverbial eye roll when they hear the word conveyancing, the things that we can do as their lawyers and PCB specifically, they can just make that journey so much more enjoyable. Like I said, you've bought a product, you've made an investment, you should be excited about it. All right, as the conveyancers, we're there to tell you all the things that can go wrong, but we don't need to be the ones that tell you it will go wrong. It's fair that you should be able to get excited about the product you're buying and not be bogged down by all of the regulatory requirements and things. We're there to make sure that the process is followed, the rules are followed, but as well that you're good, solid, simple advice. You understand what you're getting into, and on the back of that information, you can look forward to your investment
and remain enthusiastic about
their
purchase. Excellent. One word which I really liked there was collaboration, and it reminded me that what really struck me about Manchester when I first started exploring the city was the collaborative nature of the whole property ecosystem there. So the developers work very well with each other, they share information, they really are in it together. And then just to take an almost opposite word that's come to my mind a few times during the conversation is diversity. And as we wrap it up, I'm just going to ask everyone to give their one word to sum up how they see Manchester and the future of Manchester. My word is collaboration. Stephen?
Exciting.
Nathan?
Vibrant.
Jamie?
Metropolis.
Sean?
bright.
Okay, so we've got well, my word doesn't really fit in with that. I'll just stick with yours. So we've got an exciting, vibrant, bright metropolis. Okay, that sounds good. Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. What's the best way, Stephen, for people to find out more about FEC and maybe get in touch with you or your team if they were wanting to make more inquiries about your developments?
I couldn't have Nathan at Savills on the call without saying divert all inquiries to Nathan at Savills.
Okay, that's easy. Nathan, how do we get in touch?
Give us a call on our landline.
Okay, we can share the details when we distribute the podcast. So excellent. Thank you very much, Stephen, Nathan, Jamie, Sean. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, guys.